back to the Cabinets HR weekly live stream. I am Daniella Messinek-Young, your culture hacker. In this live stream, we talk about all things culture, and every week we deep dive into a topic of culture that might affect you. It might be in your workplace, it might be in your family, it might be in some group that you're in, or it might be leadership styles that you have or that you have witnessed. So thank you for joining us. On the first Tuesday of every month, I do a book review because I know we are all super busy. We don't all have time to read 60 books a year. So I prepare a write-up on some of the best ones and then have a discussion. And today we are going to talk about one of the hardest and most controversial topics in our American culture, and that is racism. This book is called White Fragility: Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism. And just as a demonstration, this live stream is not going to make me any friends, and it's going to make a lot of attacks. But that's okay, because this book is so, so, so important. You know, so to start off, I'm a liberal white Democrat. I grew up abroad. I only came to the US as a teenager, and I've often struggled with questions about race and racism. As a teenager, I had literally almost never been exposed to Black American culture, and I didn't know what to think about it, so I just didn't. As a white Hispanic, I dated pretty much everyone in my dating years from every culture. I got exposed to a lot, but I didn't think about it that much beyond that. And then when serving in the military, I finally began to interact with a lot more people of color on a regular basis. But I really truly believed, as many white people do, that because I'm a good person, because I believe in equality, that I was in no way racist, in no way operating under any racist patterns or any racist thoughts. And I've believed that for a long time. Fortunately, I've had some good friends that have in the past noticed some of my patterns of racist behavior, like calling my most hated NFL quarterback a thug, for example, and called me out on it, which is something that we as white people need to do to each other. This book is exactly about that. The term white fragility is about literally how hard it is for white people to discuss racism. And to start off, it's written by a white woman for white people. And it's written by a woman who's spent her entire adult life teaching about unconscious bias and racism, noticing it in herself, and then attempting to fix it. So, you know, this woman is paid by companies to come in and help them uncover what kind of socialization and group norms and racist behavior is operating in their cultures. And of course, she still has a really hard time doing that. But the interesting thing about this book is that if you read it with an open mind and you don't read it as attacking you, it's an easy read. It's an interesting read. It in no way comes off as attacking. And it is so easy to see so many things that have been hiding in plain sight. You know, she starts it off that, well, first I should say, it's really, really hard to understand the full argument of this book without reading it. And I've already learned that just by doing a few tweets about it on Twitter or talking about it with people at things like Thanksgiving parties. And it's very, very complex. Of course, a 160-page book also doesn't do it justice, but the 160-page book is a good way to organize your thoughts around this entirely big and complex topic. And there is a whole list of homework at the back of the book on other books that you can read, especially books written by people of color about racism, which is very, very important follow-ups. But it's interesting that the way she describes it and the way she sets it up is by dismantling our current view of racism as something that's choice and showing it as something that is a system. And we are all products of how we were socialized. We are all products of what was believed and what was taught around us, the messaging, that we saw growing up. This is why different generations are so different. People from different countries are so different. The way that we are socialized and the way that we then understand and interact with the world, that is what influences culture. That is what creates culture. That is culture. And so this book for me, was 100% what I needed to read right now. And I hope that many of you will also read it. She explains that, very interestingly, the way that we are taught to define racism makes it virtually impossible for white people to understand it. And she begins to explain this very important good-bad binary. And if you've followed me on any social media before, you know that I talk a lot about the good-bad binary and how when we are stuck in thinking that good people do culture right and bad people do culture wrong, that makes it virtually impossible for us to analyze what is really, really going on. And once again, if you know me, you know my whole goal is to help you understand the culture, understand and expose the culture that you have so that you can then get to the culture that you want, which of course is what all of us need to do on our small organizations, but also actively in our society as a whole. So she gets into the concept too that instead of looking at racism as this good people are not racist and bad people are racist, we need to understand it as a system into which we were all socialized, because in every country in the world currently, it is still better to be white than to be anything else. We are socialized into the system. The media normalizes white people's experience as normal and people of color as other. And even though it is becoming better and better and better slowly in the media, it's still not equal. And that still influences us and how we grow up and how we see things. And she's got this quote where she talks about that this book is her method, and I would also say it's an extremely useful tool for understanding the phenomena of white fragility, how we develop it, and how it protects racial inequality. And then, of course, what we can do about it. So once she gets into talking about the good-bad binary and that we need to be able to really, truly understand that when we have racist behaviors, racist thoughts, or we do things that reinforce the systemic racism that is around us, a lot of that, first of all, can be unconscious. And it doesn't mean that we're bad people. It means that we don't understand. We haven't spent time digging into socialization, digging into culture, and understanding why we think this way and why we do these things. And I think it's very interesting that she actually uses in several parts of the book, she uses sexism as an example of a less kind of like politically driven topic, but a way to explain how, it is a system that exists. For example, women didn't have the vote. Women couldn't give themselves the vote. Women had to convince men to give them the vote. Men who were in power had to decide to give themselves less power by diluting their voting power and share some of that power with women. And it's a very interesting way to talk about how, even though none of us might be at fault for racism, we still benefit from it. And we still have to make the decision to help change that system. And really, it's quite the powerful message. So rather than seeing something as, if someone does call us out, if we're lucky enough that someone calls us out in our behavior, especially a person of color, tells us about how something we did came off as racist, instead of feeling defensive or instead of feeling attacked, we can look at it as an indictment of the racist systems and racist patterns under which we've been socialized. And then we can engage with ourselves to understand why we think that way, why it works on us, and then how we can change that. And of course, by the way, it's still hard. It is still always hard every time you are told that you came off as something that you didn't intend to be. And it's very, very hard not to be defensive. But it's such an important practice, I think, to engage in. Throughout this entire book, Robin DiAngelo is the author. She addresses kind of every possible rebuttal that white people have to the idea that racism exists, that white privilege exists, or that they could possibly be benefiting from that system or even upholding that system. And she goes through it so methodically that you can see she's just taking down every concept and still somehow manages to do that without ever coming off as attacking or critical of the people themselves or their intentions. And in fact, part of the whole point is that you can and most likely are racist even though you don't intend to be. And that is what this last level of what we need to look at, of the unconscious bias and how it's unconscious bias and how it is still working in our society and on all of us. There's so many helpful concepts throughout the whole book, but then when she gets to the end, the final chapter and chapters really lay it out. The final chapter is where we go from here. And it's literally, as much as we might like, even if everyone read this book today and got woke that fast, we can't just snap our fingers and make the racism disappear. Because it's a system, it underlies everything in our society and it controls so much of how the world operates. She challenges white people to work on their tolerance for having racism pointed out and discussing it. And especially interesting on how she goes into how white people's reactions to racism are historically so involved with how racism has continued. It's a really, really important section of the book to read, and how to learn that we need to tamp down our natural responses to racism being addressed in order for this to be addressed in general, for us to have intelligent conversations and learn how to change the socialization. In summary, I have to just straight up read this wonderful quote that I can't stop thinking about. And I think it's a wonderful way for us to think of our white people's role in modern racism and what our level of responsibility is for the future. And the quote is, "I know that I have blind spots and unconscious investments in racism. My investments are reinforced every day in mainstream society. I did not set up this system, but it does unfairly benefit me. I do use it to my advantage, and I am responsible for interrupting it. I need to work hard to change my role in this system, but I can't do it alone. This understanding leads me to gratitude when others help me." And that is a quote from page 126. It's fantastic. And finally, for my part, I am just very full of humility and gratitude for the author, for writing this book, for a tool that was so great at opening my eyes to the vast and many ways that I am guilty of racism in my everyday life, and so many tools and suggestions of what I can do about it, not to mention a wonderful reading list full of homework and things and concepts that I will certainly be pursuing for many, many more years. In conclusion, as always, I hope you will read this book. I hope you will think about the concepts and start engaging with them in your own life and in your own company. Thank you so much. I am Daniella Mestenek-Young, TEDx speaker, author, and culture hacker, and this live stream is sponsored by Cavness HR, a new HR company doing HR the right way. We know that small businesses don't necessarily need and can't always afford full-time HR, and so we bring the HR to you virtually and effectively. You can have an HR expert in your pocket every day, all the time, so that you can keep your focus on building your business. If you're interested in finding out more, please look us up at www.cavnesshr.com or reach out to me at Daniella@cavnesshr.com. Thank you so much, and remember to be great every day.